make it clear.
Order.
Well, I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen Aid, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight are my ever-revolving panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Here's a satirist and political commentator, member of the Devonport Cycling Militia, David Slack, and he is the leader of the Conservative Party, the ever-satirical Colin Craig. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, Issue 1. What is Auckland going to do about its gridlock problems? Issue 2, the reintroduction of youth rates and work and safety standards described as dysfunctional. Are New Zealand workers getting a fair deal from this government? And Issue 3 tonight, where does political satire stop and defamation begin? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word. But let's kick things off tonight with Issue 1. The Consensus Building Group has released its advice on how to deal with Auckland's transport infrastructure underfunding, and it's a case of either a large increase in rates coupled with a regional fuel tax, tolls, further government contributions, and a small public transport fare increase, or a smaller increase in rates and fuel tax, further government contributions, small public transport fare increases, plus a hefty rise on motorists charged toll fares and congestion fees. Colin Craig, leader of the Conservative Party, have to ask you this question. What would Jesus drive? now, would it be a policeman? Would he catch public transport, or would he be a cyclist? I think he'd be a cyclist.
Of course he'd be a cyclist. I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure that the answer to your long question of how we fund these things is the problem is we can't fund the proposed solution right now. What we're doing, we're trying to solve a problem with something that we can't afford.
Yep.
And I think we've got to look at alternative solutions. Rail is 50 years old. Yeah, it might be great for those who were born in that generation, that age. Technology's moved on. Let's look at Vancouver, light overhead rail. Let's look at the North Shore public transport, the bus route up there. Fantastic success, but the council won't put in more car parks.
Yep.
It can't be used because people can't get a car park.
That's right.
So when we start looking at that, those are cheap things we can do that will work,
Yep.
people will use. Let's learn from things that work rather than trying to find acres of money to do stuff that's just not going to solve the problem.
So you don't see gridlock as a problem for future growth? You think it can be dealt with on the cheap?
I think that overhead lightweight rail
Right.
is a lot cheaper than what we're proposing in terms of the rail at the moment. It will carry more people and it will enable us to expand much more quickly and broadly than we can. Because you can put that over the top of existing roadways. You're not committed to the land that the rail already has.
Yep. David, these rules aren't even going to take place until 2021. It's a bit of a farce, isn't it? Is Len Brown doing enough to get Auckland moving?
Oh yeah, look, just because it's in 2021, it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea to start setting those kinds of long-term rules in place, because this is the tragedy of Auckland, that we've never been able to plan more than 2 or 3 years in advance of that.
Yeah.
If you do make those sort of plans and people start to adhere to them and say, well, this is on track now, let's keep going with it, you've actually got a halfway decent chance of making something productive and workable. I'm intrigued by what Colin's said about overhead rail. If it would work, I'd be all in favour of it. I'm just sceptical about the cost involved and whether you're not necessarily going to be spending more money going that way than in achieving the central loop and unlocking a vast amount of capacity in the rail system we've already put money into. A lot of people are very happily using that rail system. And it's...
And yet a lot aren't, right? We've got a lot of garages,
sure.
so let's not... And it's hugely subsidised.
But that's because...
Whereas the northern bus route is not. And I think that's the beauty of it. That's something that people are using in droves and would use more, and it is paying its own way. Those are good solutions.
But let's bear in mind, let's recall that when the busway was mooted, there were a lot of people who are now being sceptical about the rail loop, who were sceptical back then about the busway, saying, nobody will use that.
Well, of course, it was done before the super city as well. We point out the obvious. It might not be possible now.
Colin, Auckland has paid Wellington billions and billions and billions in tax, and we have only ever had a fraction of that back to reinvest into our infrastructure. When does Auckland get its due?
Well, look, I think, and people have asked me a lot about my intentions for the Mayoralty. I'm not running. Why? Because a lot of Auckland's problems actually have to be solved from the centre and from central government. So, and that's one of the funding issues, of course, always an issue that Aucklanders point out. The rest of the country, strangely, are not so concerned about that.
Well, of course not.
But,
They don't
but
care.
Aucklanders, hey, we know we paid huge amounts in regional transport tax, particularly, which just never came back. And there are some. It is time to invest in Auckland. It's how we do that and how we make it work.
Because John Key is deaf to that argument, absolutely deaf to it.
Well, they're saying, of course, they've got major priorities, big projects like the huge road up to Whangarei and opening up the north and all those sorts of things. So they've identified super projects, and that's where they want to go. You know, that's not helping us in the middle of Auckland, right?
Exactly. You see that gridlock getting in and out of Auckland. You can't move for crying out loud. So should we have that highway going north?
I think there's a lot of littler projects that would be very high value in terms of getting things moving in Auckland. Little underpasses, overpasses, here and there. You can have relatively minor spends but make a significant difference. Those things, I think, shouldn't be put aside.
David, the government is hell-bent on starting South Auckland in Taupo with urban sprawl rather than intensification. How can National be taken seriously in terms of funding public transport properly when they are just when they're actually, you could argue, part of the problem?
Is that a trick question, Bomber?
Well,
you can't take them seriously. I mean, not every infrastructure dollar is equal. The dollar that you spend in rail or in cycleways has vastly more carrying potential than the dollar you pay for the extra car on the road. You just keep on spending with that particular kind of infrastructure. Colin's right about the Holiday Highway. You could take the Auckland Transport blog is the Bible for all of this infrastructure change, and they show you how you could make that road safe and more efficient for about 400 million instead of the over 1.5 that they're going to spend, billion they're going to spend on this. That could go into the Central Rail one. There's another two that's worth thinking about, and you can find these savings in many different places if you look, as Colin has said. There is a proposal with the wastewater scheme in Auckland to do, what's it called, the Central Interceptor? I forget its name. Which is going to cost a vast amount of money. It could be done in a way that North Shore did. Joel Caford is the expert on this, and he demonstrates how they did it there in the 90s, and I remember it happening, for a great deal less. Long story short, you could free up 400 million there.
Right.
I think there are a lot of instances like that where this super city has impelled us into inefficient and very excessive spending, which we could refine and apply much more intelligently.
I really agree with that.
Final question with both of you. Who has the answers for Auckland? John Minto has just announced his candidacy today. Len Brown obviously is running. Morris Williamson. Who's got the answers for Auckland?
Look, I'll be honest, it'd be pretty hard to pick between them. I mean, as a centre-right person, you would think that maybe I'd favour Morris Williamson, but I'd be pretty worried, actually. His track record's not good enough for my liking.
Morris Williamson, he is touted as the solution to a broken relationship. I would suggest if Morris was the solution, the relationship's already fled to Sydney and living anonymously and not paying child support.
That's right, deadbeat dad. More to the point, the relationship is going to change next year, more than likely.
Right.
You're going to have a Green Labour coalition.
Very hopeful thinking. Very hopeful thinking.
I think the momentum is there, and therefore the relationship with Len would be excellent.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2, New Zealand workers are having it rough under this government. Youth rates have been reintroduced, and a report this week on workplace health and safety shows the standards are dysfunctional. David, surprise, surprise, deregulating health and safety standards has seen workplace accident rates in New Zealand 20 to 25 times higher than in Australia and Britain. Why are so many New Zealanders dying for just going to work?
This is the story writ large of our economy in the last generation, and that is that we have become a low-cost, low-wage economy that's trying to compete on price rather than on quality, and this is where you end up. You have employers trying to get the last dollar out of their people rather than finding ways to be more productive, more moving up the scale to producing goods and services that are of high value. And this is where you end up. We are now getting used to the idea of being a kind of a second world economy. And I can see the argument that these guys are making that the small businesses of the country will be helped if we change the laws in these ways. But it's short-sighted again. It's the wrong approach to transformation. We've got to accept that we've come a long way down, and it's going to take time to get back up. But just getting content with being a long way down, which is what this is a prescription for, is not acceptable.
Colin, you weaken the unions in a recession when everyone is desperate for a job and health and safety standards fly out the window. How would the Conservative Party stop employers exploiting workers?
Well, I think, let's come back. I don't think deregulation is the single problem in terms of health and safety. And the report that came out identified that. There's a number of problems.
Self-regulation is a problem?
Well, I always question self-regulation and whether it really works, because, of course, self-interest tends to come writ large. Yeah. But one of the issues here is we've got a very unskilled, untrained workforce. And frankly, someone who's not skilled, whether it's a simple construction job or not, is in much higher danger of giving themselves an injury. And that comes through, and that's one of the big issues here. We didn't invest in training, we didn't have apprenticeships. We pay a price for that across the board, and actually safety on the work site's one of those. So let's not leave that out of it, and that's part of the solution.
So what would you want to see?
Oh, look, we need better training. We need better trade training. David's right on the productivity front. If we don't improve our productivity, it doesn't matter what we do, we're always going to have low wages. If our workers were producing the same average value of goods as an Australian, our wages would be 20 to 30% higher. So the focus should be on the going forward, on how we make every person's hour worth more money.
You're a businessman. How do you make work and safety important where you work?
Yeah, well, we make it part of our team culture. I have to say that I know tons of businessmen, and none of them see what you pay in an hourly rate as the main issue here.
Right.
You know, they're more concerned, can the worker turn up on time? Have they got a commitment to the job? Can they follow instructions? And have they got the skills? And so I don't think this is going to be any sort of silver bullet here.
Is the central government falling down? If they're not providing the services to upskill workers, and we're actually getting a large worker base now who don't have those skills, who's supposed to pick this up?
We are living in a country where they'll throw $20,000 a year at a university student to study something rather obscure and utterly useless. They will give little or nothing to trade training. Now that balance to me is wrong. You're assuming some guy studying something totally useless is worth a lot more than some guy on the tools.
Well,
to me, that's a bad equation.
It's good to have
to me, that's a bad equation.
At McDonald's.
Hey, McDonald's train their people well, and they have a much lower injury rate for it.
David, isn't paying 16 to 19-year-olds $11 an hour a clever move, seeing as 16 and 17-year-olds can't vote?
I should just respond to Colin first and defend all of the liberal arts students of the country.
Including me.
Value added, is it?
Yes. Just the tax there,
you know, the key to a high value economy is having intelligent, creative people. You've got to. This is, and I agree. We've stopped spending money on trade training, and we never should have. But I don't think that there should be the one or the other. I think we need both. We actually had a sort of a trade training system, which was also good for workplace safety as well, in the pre-Rogernomics era, which was the railways workshops, the forestry, and to a lesser extent the post office. And these were places where, to an extent, it was recognised that this is where you soaked up unemployment.
Yep.
But you actually gave people jobs, you gave them training. People came out of those railway workshops with great trade skills, and they went all over the world doing amazing things.
That's true.
And we have to accept that that's a good focus. It's much better to have someone in something, learning something, than 25% of 16 to 19-year-olds doing nothing.
The Conservative Party has come out very hard against the youth minimum wage, the new youth wage. Why?
Oh, because it's not the focus. It's not the point, is it? It's not going to solve any problem. It's not like we've got young people sitting around in jobs that need to be done. The reality is unemployment is at least 6%, and a lot of people think it's higher. Underemployment is 10%. So all we're really doing is asking people to do something which is impossible, really, which is to go out and find a job when there isn't one. So for me, we've got to be very realistic. If we want to say to people, we want you in jobs and we want you in work, let's make sure there are jobs and work there for them.
Do you think that, would from your perspective, would the youth wage be scrapped if you were in a position?
I do accept that when someone is in a training role, they are actually getting skills, not just a pay. And so in that situation, I accept that wages could be less. But when somebody's doing the same job with the same output, but they get paid less purely on the basis of age, that doesn't seem fair to me, and I don't think New Zealanders think it's fair either.
There isn't anything in the Labour report from the old Labour Department that suggested that this would actually create more or generate more jobs anyway. So really, it's just a way of sticking it to younger workers, isn't it?
Well, I won't presume. I think there's an intention to try and get some transition from people from doing nothing to a job, i.e., look, we're going to make it more palatable maybe for an employer to make the stretch to get someone in to do the job. But as I say, I know tons of employers and none of them think that way.
Do you also think, though, that it could be for unscrupulous employers out there who want to turn over their workforce pretty quickly, and some of those supermarket industries, some of those fast food industries, they would be able to turn over staff pretty quickly and you're bringing in much cheaper labour?
Look, there are always going to be some employers in that space. But for most employers, I think they recognise that building a good relationship with staff and bringing them through as someone who becomes a committed worker in your organisation is what makes the most sense.
Question of both of you, are these moves a symptom of a very weak union movement? And when will we see the political left give them some teeth policy-wise? It's not like Labour and the Greens have really rolled up to the unions with a whole bunch of suggestions, is it?
I think I've said before on this program that I think that the Labour Party needs to consider refashioning itself for the 21st century as a workers' rights party, but one that articulates it in a way that people understand. They grew up with this idea of unions bad, strikes bad. They don't realise that, in fact, collective representation to say these hours I'm working, this workload I'm shouldering is unreasonable, because everywhere you look, you've got people who are saying they've never worked so hard in their life. Now we've stuffed up. It's not acceptable, and it needs to change. And it's a symptom of what I was complaining about at the start of this conversation, which is that we are just adapting or reconciling ourselves to the notion that we're a low-wage, low productivity economy, and we just keep shaving things off every edge to try and make that tolerable, instead of saying, this won't do, we've got to change.
The right have put out the red carpet for bosses and given them a lot more powers, right, to be able to fire someone after 90 days. The political left haven't done the same for the unions. They haven't really stepped up and offered them a huge range of big bitey teeth to have a go back at them. Why is that?
I'm not sure that would be helpful. I'm not sure that these sorts of moves are helpful either. I get the feeling there's a little bit of desperation and perhaps a little bit of unwillingness to address the big issues like productivity and economic growth, which ultimately help everybody out. And so instead we sit there in a difficult situation where we're going backwards, going, well, gee, if we've got to rebalance the dollars, National might help the employer a little bit, Labour help the worker a little bit, but at the end of the day, these are not solutions. We need the growth.
Right. Okay, thank you, panel. Moving on, it's been a case of life imitating art recently when Colin Craig threatened to sue satirical website The Civilian for defamation over words they had very wittily put into his mouth, which leads nicely to our final issue of the show. Where does political satire stop and defamation begin? Colin, let me begin by asking you, what do you consider satirical?
Well, look, I think satirical is somebody, I guess, using a colloquial phrase, taking the mickey, having a bit of a go, finding something funny in a situation that they can perhaps emphasise. I personally love political cartoons, and they tend to do that. They tend to find a point or a comment, just push it a little bit into the realm of fantasy where people kind of emphasise the point. So that's what I think satire is.
Monty Python's Life of Brian, that's satire?
Parts of it, and some of that I think are funny. Some of that probably I don't get. But I think satire is like that. It tends to be horses for courses.
So let's get into it. Why did you threaten Citizen Blog with defamation? What was it? Because when you look at it wasn't exactly harsh.
No. Look, and people are unaware of this, but as I've gone along, we've asked a number of media to make corrections and to apologise. And they've all done that, actually, and we'll continue to do that where we think there's cause. One of the problems we've got as a new political party, started 7.5 weeks before the last election, people actually don't really know who we are and all about us. That might be surprising for some of the more educated viewers who are up to speed, but for a lot of New Zealanders, they don't know who we are. The media that we get and what people say is forming that opinion. And so we are being more cautious around that than, say, any established political party. People know them, they're in Parliament, they've got an established reputation. Those parties, they take it probably, I think, with a much broader set of
But
shoulders.
you did stop the action. You kind of decided, well, we've made the point.
Yeah, we got what we asked for,
okay.
and we've never pushed it further than the apology, retraction, correction. I have on 2 occasions got a right to write a response. Real R's in there. So I can come back and say, no, look, this is what I really think about an issue, but only when we think that's warranted.
Sure. David, is it Colin being very clever here? Being very, very clever with this defamation case. He's using the mainstream media as a vehicle to use Old Testament language to rally those religious New Zealanders on the fringes, and for all the mocking us liberal elites give him, he gains new voters, doesn't he?
Oh, look, the lesson I drew from last week is don't issue a press release, issue a writ. This guy got way more coverage this way. But I have to say, I told him before we came on, he's been a big disappointment to me because I came on this very program last year and said, that Colin Craig, he's going to be the logical partner for the National Party. He's saying all this sensible stuff, the little bit of which you heard just before. But then he comes and does this astonishing stuff about gay rights or lack thereof. And well, I just had to pile in with everybody else satirising him. And I have to say I was a little hurt that he sued all my friends and not me.
But he is.
But to my relief, I discovered he didn't actually know I'd done anything about him in Metro.
But he is reaching out to a polarised part of New Zealand who who feel quite alienated by some more of society's progressive moves. He has been able to reach out there. He's a real contender for breaking that 5%, isn't it?
Oh, without question. And the obligation that falls on his shoulders now is to recognise that whenever you stroke a disaffected minority, you need to do it responsibly rather than be resorting to any kind of demagoguery or ignorance. And I said elsewhere in the media this week that what Colin just said now about people not being so savvy or familiar with politics is kind of a nice way of saying, vote for me, you're dumb enough. And I think you've got to be careful when you're...
He's making the case, is he not, that a falsehood about him and about what he stands for, he wanted to correct that. And certainly for the people who are supporters of his already, that idea of falsehoods and having something they believe in mocked and pushed around and knocked a bit, it certainly resonates, doesn't it?
Yes, well, we need to distinguish those two things because certainly everyone has their right to a genuinely held opinion and not be mocked about it. Although, no, I should qualify that because all opinions should be can be and should be contested. And sometimes,
and at least within the realm of belief.
If it seems particularly risible, I'm certainly going to make fun of it.
Yeah.
You know, I can do that kindly, I can do it harshly, I can do it viciously.
You can do it Steve Browney
Take your pick.
which is another level beyond, right?
And then he might guarantee he gets a letter from me. But the reality is you're talking about this disaffected minority. I assume you're talking about the 50% of New Zealanders that didn't want marriage to change. And the reality is, on this debate, there has been, in the media, perceived by that 50% that don't support it, they've perceived the media have had an agenda. And some of them less so than others. But when I make a stand on this and I say, look, I want a correction or I want a retraction or I want to write a reply, you need to understand that that's the average conservative New Zealander sits there and goes, go, Colin, because that's actually what they want. And in fact, you know, we've got literally thousands and thousands of people who have joined up. We had the momentum already, but there's no question that momentum picked up over this issue simply because people were saying, that guy, I might disagree with him, say, on the economic stuff, but gee, are you saying what I think on this particular issue?
Cast your mind back to, for example, the Springbok tour. Country was divided over it. You try and find me anybody now who'll tell you, I thought it was a good idea to have that tour. Things change and it becomes less... the strength of what you perceive to be a 50-50 divide of opinion can actually be rather less solid than you perceive it to be. That in a few years' time, that 50%
I-
just sort of melts
argue
away.
like a true progressive. Well
Indeed,
done.
indeed. Final question very quickly here. Where is the line between satire and defamation when it comes to those amongst us seeking political office? Where's the line for you?
I think for everybody that's always going to be a judgment call. In terms of where we see it, we've got to ask the question, does this matter and is it defining who we are in an incorrect way?
Where's the line?
Sorry, where's the line? Where?
Between defamation and political satire?
On the far side of Colin.
Spoken like a true satirist.
Let's wrap the show with final word. David, your final word this week is?
Well, I tell you what, the other night I was walking home from the ferry at night and I saw in the streets of Devonport this bird come swooping down and it was a moorpork. Only the second moorpork I've ever seen in my life. I saw one in the bush once in Te Arawa, but here it was in suburban Devonport. Now, I thought that was lovely enough, and I was going to mention that just to say, isn't it great how our towns are filling back up with bird life, and that's true too, for kaukako. But it did remind me of one other thing, and that is that the candidate for president of the presidency of Venezuela said that he saw a bird come to him at the start of the campaign, and it was the reincarnation of Hugo Chavez.
Oh, lucky.
And he told him, I am Hugo Chavez, and I've come to tell you this will lead you into the sunlit uplands of prosperity, vote for me. And so this guy, who is now the president-elect of Venezuela, took this to the people and they embraced him because he had a visitation. So I can only say that moorpork was talking to me that night and it said, don't vote for Morris.
Colin, your final word this week.
Look, my final word is I actually think we're in an interesting time in New Zealand politics. We are seeing some change. Now, obviously, the Conservative Party is part of that, but not only that. I think what we're going to see over the next while is a renewal. Politicians that have probably been there far too long are going to start falling away. Look, we're talking about a number of them now looking at local body positions, mayoralties, whatever. It's about time. I think we need a different kind of politics in New Zealand. Pragmatic. As a centre-right mainstream party, we like pragmatic, but I think you can find pragmatic on both sides of the House. And I think we've got people that are willing to be more about consensus politics. That'll be great for this country.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Colin. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. The piece of satire that was directed at Colin Craig from the very funny Citizen blog was about global warming. And on that front, there is little to laugh about. This week, the measured carbon dioxide in the atmosphere hit 399.5 parts per million. The last time there was that much of a buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 3 million years ago, although we'll forgive Colin if he claims it was only 8,500 years. That amount of carbon in the atmosphere makes the planet 3 degrees warmer with sea levels 25 metres higher than they are now. It took nature millions of years to build up CO2 to these levels. We've done that in the space of a couple of centuries. The feedback lash from the manner in which we recklessly waste resources needs to be urgently addressed as the issue that risks all others. So let's be clear. The science really is in on global warming. So if you're justifying your inaction under the pretense that there's still some scientific question mark over anthropogenic climate change, rest assured you're just being politically lazy and not nihilistically pragmatic. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.